So before we get into the meat of our intended topic for today, I wondered if people who had 24 hours or so to marinate on the coronavirus issues and a short time to be peppered by their own employees and their own constituents about what they're going to do this second over what is really largely unknown. I wondered if folks had more time to think about that and digest that, or size the problem up, or have any different approaches or other things they thought about since yesterday.
So last night I got a first request from one of our franchisees looking for royalty abatement. So I'm curious as to, is anybody else looking at royalty relief, and how would you suggest we address it?
I think if you're considering royalty relief, you have to look at the entire picture and make sure that the franchisees really needs the assistance. Sometimes you'll see franchisees asking for something even though they really don't need it. What we've done in the past is tried to get relief from the key creditors, and it makes it a lot easier for the ZOR to participate if the bank's gone interest only, if the landlords have provided some relief, and if the franchisee is taking some steps to reduce their burn rate or their negative cash flow situation. So whether that's taking a salary decrease or things like that. But we've always looked at that as a holistic approach. The franchisor should not be the first and only place that the Z goes to get relief. It should be part of an overall solution. And hopefully it's only a short-term problem, not a longer-term problem.
Anybody else grappling with abatements and or workouts, or a little early on? Steve, I'm sorry.
I hope this doesn't sound cold or not really considering franchisees, but I just think royalty abatements in general are a very slippery slope for the organization. And this is going to, again, maybe sound insensitive, but there is an abatement. If they're impacted revenue-wise, they're paying less royalties, you're impacted revenue-wise. So it's shared success, shared, when you get negatively impacted. I think the thing to do is just to explain that would be very difficult to do. For me, I've explained it by saying we like to be very fair about and very transparent about how we run the business. And so we start going down this path. If we do it for one, we have to do it for many, if not all. And how would you say no to the next person that asks? And then how do we run the organization to drive what we need and the resources we need through this endeavor? So I would highly encourage you to explain that it's part of your operating model, which is going to allow you to help continue to develop the business through these kind of challenges, and that you're impacted as well. But there are a lot of other ways to get at it, but royalties is a really difficult one. The only other thing is you'll drive your accounting department crazy when you start having multiple different deals on royalty revenue and trying to manage that.
Anybody else dealing with royalty abatement or thinking about it? If you're a franchisor, you're going to get asked, right, one way or another.
I'd say the first thing is I got a text too, and our business is not going to be, it's not like a food business or anything that's going to be affected immediately. But the first thing I thought of is like, if right now I say, okay, well there's no minimums or there's no royalty or whatever, we're essentially like 2 days into this big crisis, and we're already telling our franchisees just like, go ahead and throw in the towel and ride it out. Like, we're not going to be able to come up with any solutions. We're not going to be able to do this. And so I think there's a mindset with it of being like, look, we're going to figure out ways to get through this without just saying, okay, we'll push pause and nobody have to pay anything and everybody just kind of hang out for the next 90 days and we'll be good. Because what I do know is that once you tell somebody they don't have to pay a royalty for 2 months, in 3 months, when they do have to pay a royalty, it's going to be a lot harder to get it out. I mean, their habits will change that fast, and it's hard to get that back going.
I'm sure it'd be really popular to say, hey, when you're done your salary cut and doing the other 3 jobs here, you can still send us our check full, right? But and remember, I think it depends on how bad it gets. I remember sort of fast food business in the old days, like there were 3-party agreements where everybody took a haircut equally, and that was the only way you got people to the table. So like, we're one day in, the people will ask you for royalty abatement one day in, would suggest that there's a missing link from yesterday, which is that you haven't communicated with them saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're monitoring, because if you don't at least commit to monitoring it and keeping an eye on it and considering on a daily basis, people use their own interpretations. We have people who have decided that because something in an adjoining county has happened, that because there was no communication, it was like, well, do we come to work tomorrow? Well, did you wake up yesterday to come to work? But did anyone tell you not to come to work? But it creates uncertainty because we have been here, sequestered by Lake Fisher and incapable of issuing our own emergency policy, except for Joe Dunn, who did it this morning, because we couldn't wait another day. But that was really what we thought.
No, I had a question for Steve. Steve, do you view it differently with minimums? Would you waive minimums and live with just the gross, or vice versa, or do you have a hard and fast rule?
I didn't operate with minimums, and I know a lot of people do now. And I think that's something that maybe you could take into consideration. That way you're not kind of messing with the equation. And I think I would ask myself, in any environment, are these minimums reasonable? Because I have seen FDDs and companies with minimums that are relatively high regarding what the business model output could be. So I think it has a lot to do with what those minimums look like, how reasonable they are in a regular market, and then would it be reasonable to make some kind of adjustment in a different kind of market. Yeah, I think there's an area I might be willing to sit down with my leadership team and talk through, depending on the reasonableness of the minimums. Depending on how long it takes to get up to that run rate for that minimum, and does that minimum mean you're at break even as a franchisee or you're not? So I've seen some minimums where you're not at break even, but your expectation is you're going to get there fast. But there's no consideration given to things out of your control, like this.
Well, I think some of like our governor mandated, he closed the school, everything in a particular county, and mandated that you pay the people. If you can't have them work remotely, then you'll pay them to not work remotely. And so that's pretty dramatic. That would scare me if I was a franchisee who had recently signed a real estate lease, and pledged everything else I own. It would make me feel warmer to know that the franchisor was aware of it, that at least in somebody factoring the calculus for me, that they were considering that I had labor, even though I was closed, I had labor, right? How crazy is that? Yeah. But we do. Just Governor Wolf one more time said, if you're not an essential retail business, don't open. So the King of Prussia Mall came back this morning and said, well, we don't know what non-essential retail is. There's stuff you got to buy at the mall, a pair of earrings, some of the shoes, Louboutins, but they're staying open. But the directive wasn't to close. So just interpreting what the politicians are saying, and then it's always without the 7 paragraphs of detail that would tell you how it applies to you. But it's really challenging, and I can imagine that it would create a period of isolation for franchisees, because it would create one for me, just as a human being. So, and I don't know if people can I have an abatement sort of like, hey, do you know that I know that you know that I know that there's a problem, right? But now hopefully we'll have some outbound communications that do that, and I think there's been some stuff in the room that I'd love to talk about more, because we've been through these crises before, and sort of motivated by a financial crisis as opposed to
Also when you're doing those kind of
You don't mind?
Yes. I could turn it on, that'd be dangerous. When you're thinking about those things as well, I do think that you want to be fair and honest to the whole, but you also want to consider the person asking. For an example, is that franchisee are they in compliance? Have they submitted their financials on a regular basis? Are you really aware of their current financial condition, or is it an ask as a result of an opportunity in the environment? So I think this is really, I think, a very important part of what we do is when we have to make these kind of special considerations, it has a lot to do, in my opinion, with the kind of compliance, the kind of information we have, and how much we really understand about where the franchisee is in their business. Are they making money, losing money? Where do they stand? Have they been compliant? That would be my thoughts.
Amy, so I'd like you to share we had a conversation yesterday about trying to move more of your retail brick and mortar business to your online portal, which has a different spread for franchisees in terms of they're doing it without me telling you the whole story.
Sure. So we're still working out the details right now, but I have about 75 brick and mortars. We have a unique layout for how we handle our internet business with our franchisees. So through our POS system, we register guests in the store. We're mainly in high traffic areas, so destination locations, Disney, Pier 39, San Francisco, and such. So we want to capture as much of the guests' data as we possibly can, and we give back to the franchisees a percentage of sales from the internet. They register them in their store, that becomes proprietary, and anytime that guest orders online, no matter when, how much, as long as that email is live, that franchisee gets a percentage. So we pushed yesterday really hard and offered free shipping, some unique and different things online to get our products out to these folks. And we've increased the percentage for a short time while this is going on. And it really encouraged the franchisees to push that out too. So we're really trying to look at unique ways that we can support the franchisees while this is going on, and especially because we're going to be impacted because there are no crowds gathering in these locations.
There are things you can do, right? There are constructive things you can do rather than waiting for the world to end, or to think that you can fix it yourself. But every system is different. Who else is thinking about it? Shane, you were talking about this a little yesterday, weren't you, in terms of what you were trying to, you want to repeat that?
Yeah.
Could you?
I've just got a whole list from franchisees. Are we going to continue to charge royalties? Sorry, I have bacon in my mouth.
Are we going to continue to be bacon?
They want to know if we're going to keep charging royalties. They want to know if we're going to continue charging local store marketing fees. They want to know if we're going to continue charging the software support fees. Let's see, what else? What provisions has Massage Heights franchising made for staff at HQ to continue to support our operations? Should there be a shutdown? I've got a whole list of things they want to
In
know.
what, 30 hours, people
Yeah.
came up with two, and we have them coming from our office. It's incredible. The millennial mind works incredibly quickly in
Yeah.
analyzing how this is going to affect them,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. The list goes on, actually. They want to know if employees can claim unemployment during a shutdown. I don't know.
But so there's
The president said they would be able, so this is the president, but
Yeah.
he did say they would be able to in his address on
You did say that?
yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I actually at 11 o'clock today, I have a call with our FAC, just to kind of, not going to give them any answers on these things yet, but more as a proactive approach to let them know that we're on top of it and that we're thinking about all of these things. And, we did start several days ago actually just looking at, our finances and what it might look like if there were a decrease in sales and our royalties and all of that, and as far as our staffing goes. And so we're thinking about all those things too.
So I wear two hats. I'm a franchisee and I'm also a vendor in the same space. So I own Club Pilates studios in California, just for reference. And the data, so from a banking perspective, I called my banker yesterday, got everything set up on interest only for the next 6 months, and that was super easy. He's gonna send me all the paperwork today and we'll get that done.
just by asking.
Just asking. Just being the first person there. He said I was the first person to call and ask. He's like, other people are telling me what's up, but you're the one that says, let's do this. So it was really easy. He knew it was coming. He knows it's gonna be a big thing. So, and he does tons of SBA stuff. The other point is it's easy to get scared as a franchisee and as a marketing vendor. A lot of franchisees are like, what do I do with my spend? Should I stop spending? Well, yesterday, my studio sold 17 memberships. So it's not the end of the world yet. And so take people back to the data and say, lead cost is actually really low right now. We're getting a lot of people coming in as leads at a very good price, and people are coming into intros, which is crazy. Our studio is actually full. A lot of people are coming to classes and taking classes. And so the data doesn't actually support that it's the end of the world this week. So
That's interesting, because we had you know, a lot of folks here are involved in development. A lot of them were saying it's very different and everybody's we're waiting mode. And others were saying, I'm hoping to get my 3 inked this week. They're approved, they're ready to roll. And absent the franchisee saying he's not done doing it, it's going to happen. And so, but it's, again, been 48 hours or 72. Whatever you want to dial this back to, like, it's recent, and I don't think we know what's going to happen, right? And I don't think that taking our foot off the gas or not making critical marketing expenses that got us where we were is ever going to make it easy to restart the engine when whoever it is with the divine, knowledge of when we're back online tells you to put it back online. You can never get that back online. You can never get the momentum moving again that you have. So either, and I don't know if that's a Pied Piper until you fall off the flat world, or whether it's you're by having faith and confidence in the way it's always been, it will come back. What other stuff is franchising? Go ahead, Turn.
So we're seeing retail sales are at flat or in the affected areas like Seattle, where they're 20% down, but not more than 20%. What we're really getting affected is mobile, like catering. So the catering is being canceled, pretty much 100%. So I think that's another aspect, I guess, to think about is like, you have outbound versus like retail.
Yours is more theatrical, right? If you could deliver a finished product, that seems to be what everybody else in the restaurant business is going to be doing.
We're going to start promoting more, DoorDash and just pushing that. And also online, gift cards to try and promote future sales.
Are the franchisees yet calling you looking for leadership?
A few, not many. The only ones that are really calling are ones in Seattle.
But Seattle has had a longer run rate than many of the other cities or states that we have, right? So, did anybody learn anything from Seattle? Did any franchisor do anything differently with respect to the more protracted drop in sales there than what we're dealing with this moment? Sessler, things still moving there in Seattle? Yeah. That would be a hearty no on getting anything done. Any learning from that? Yeah.
One thing I think you could do, if they're looking for royalty abatement, is say, well, everybody's going to pay their royalty, but for the next 3 months, we're going to put all of your royalty or half of your royalty back into local marketing for the stores. So you're still going to pay the royalty, so we're still keeping that habit. We're going to put more of it back into your market. Maybe even come up with a different idea. Like, this is our idea for how we're going to market during this thing. It'd be interesting to pair up, if you're like a food company or retail, pair up with another, like a disaster franchise to have, you've got ServPro that comes in every night and disinfects your gym. And then you could do a whole marketing, you could pair that with, you could piggyback off another brand that says every single night they come into Athletic Republic, they're disinfecting everything, they're doing this, like this is the safest place that we've got, and then ServPro can be, or whoever, is doing the same thing. And you can kind of go back and forth, but make people feel safe, and then you're putting that money back into that campaign.
That's great. I think that's great. Anybody else know anything? We're here. Oh, sorry.
We had some franchisees looking for site locations yesterday when all this stuff happened, and so they're going on their tours, and at the end of the day they decided, well, we figure we better just wait because we don't know what's going to happen. We're afraid to start negotiating on a lease with landlords. So I was wondering if anybody's dealt with that, what they tell their franchisees on that, to pull the trigger, keep pulling the trigger?
Franchisee signed, right? He signed, has a contractual period to open. I'm not saying this is the day.
Yeah.
That's a franchise agreement and start taking names, yes. But it's not I'll open if I feel like it. It has some ramifications, and pushing it. I mean, it almost might see what the rental rate is now versus what it might be if the thing was recovered.
Right. That's what the worry is. Should we wait on negotiating a lease a little bit, or should we put some clauses in our LOIs and lease negotiations with the landlord for this thing? I was wondering if anybody dealt with that. Contingency, yeah, like coronavirus clause.
Anybody in landlords? No. Getting that thing? I think it's too early, really.
It doesn't directly apply, but in lead gen, you're seeing like the people like pushing back on purchasing. Like, I just went to Discovery Day today, but gonna wait. And some of the advice I see people giving is like, hey, you know what? Like, you went to this Discovery Day. Probably a lot of people are backing out, or think they're putting it on pause like you are. But if you're the one that's actually moving forward, maybe there's opportunity, and he actually negotiated some better terms because he's kind of taking advantage of that opportunity, but instead of not moving forward, maybe for them, hey, look, like, this landlord's probably nervous too, it actually could be a good time to get a better lease. Maybe you lock in some crazy term for 10 years that you benefit from,
Yeah, so my son David here, sitting next to me, goes to school an hour away from here, BYU in Provo. And yesterday they canceled everything, everything's going online. Basically sent the kids home, so he came here. It was kind of fun for me, a kind of early spring break for him. But we were just talking, and so much of what's going on is preventative, because we don't know. It's based on uncertainty. And like Lane was saying, if you take your foot off the gas, I thought that was a great comment, Lane. Take your foot off the gas, you're going to lose that momentum that you already started. So I think we can, and I've been advised by insurance people of all people to say, to not take too much on ourselves to advise our people, but advise them to go to World Health Organizations and the CDC and find out for themselves, the best way to handle it in their area and get legal advice from people in their area. So we've been advised not to take a lot of stands and to give a lot of direction for that sake. And I'd like to hear anybody's comments on that. But like I say, we were talking about how this is so much of it is preventative, and if we can keep our people hopeful and say, listen, this is a flu, this is something that may pass, we don't know. It may be a season of this, and then everything will be right back. And so I think we try to keep our people hopeful, and like I say, don't take your foot off the gas, and use it as a tool to maybe negotiate right now some better things.
I mean, because you have the mic, so you do home health care. So you're gonna send people into people's houses, so they're not going to a place of mass congregation, but they're going one after another to places they can't speak for the amount of Lysol or amount of disinfecting or who people had contact with.
Right.
Are people gonna walk in with diving bells to go walk grandma to the grocery store? Where does it end and where does it begin?
So people are getting sent home from assisted living facilities, nursing homes. They're getting sent to their homes. So that's actually a good thing for home care, right? We can take care of them in their homes. But the challenge for us is people are nervous about caregivers going from house to house. And so we're looking to Home Care Association of America, some other places, and the guidance we're getting is make sure everybody's washing their hands and taking all the protocols to stay clean if they go from one place to the next. And so that's the only thing that we can say is we're taking a lot of measures to make sure our people are constantly remaining disinfected if they're moving from place to place, and just, again, trying to give them the peace of mind that we're here to care for you, help you through this, and we're doing everything we can to remain healthy from house to house.
I think those are great points. I think sending people to CDC is where to send, and that's where it's updated constantly. And if you try to paraphrase it, I can only be certain that you will not get it right.
Yeah.
And you're not a doctor, you're not a medical professional, you don't think of a food. You should be a guy saying, what are the legal requirements of us, and how do we protect our customers, right, and our franchisees? And I think that's where you have to come from in terms of thoughtfulness as you sit here now. But how many people have thought through whether their businesses can be operated remotely at any level, and whether they could still perform, or whether operating remotely means you're closed? I think that's what it means in a lot of places. If you have a pretzel bakery, it's closed. If you're operating remotely, certainly not selling any pretzels. So I think some businesses some business can be transacted remotely, bill keeping back of house, but not selling actual products. Does anybody have a business that could not be operated at all remotely, that would have to, so you'd essentially be closing at that time? So that's what I was thinking. Is food not essential? They're being so vague. Because I went back to try to see, well, restaurants have to be specifically defined. Maybe they're open or they're not, and you believe that they would be, and what would crush people, the little guys, right? But we think that they're open. But nobody's going in to eat at one. If you talk to anyone who works at one, they're having stuff bust in. So this is really interesting. What we learned is that everybody needs to have a plan. Maybe our business is a little bit different. Of if you're isolated from your office, like Jay was talking about yesterday, and it may seem so remote as you think through it, and it may have technology costs that are so dramatic in terms of what your mind's eye thinks is reasonable. But I think that you have to know what will happen in that regard. And we were talking yesterday about leadership. All those one-way communications back to you, pointing the finger and asking you for something are probably symptoms of a lack of leadership, because you haven't spoken on it. So people immediately assume that you're closed and they have 2 weeks off and they could be at home. Oh, seriously, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think maybe to help you round it out, and I agree with you 100%, how many of us were in leadership positions during 9/11 in the room? This is what we chose, man, to be leaders. And so, you know, we faced the good times, we faced uncertain times, we faced a lot. We all know America and Americans are super resilient people anyways. So this is our challenge and opportunity to stand up, to lead, to reassure. I agree, Lane, 100%, by the way, great presentation. And nice to meet you.
If you liked it, I'm
Dad's a
late.
rock star.
If you liked it, I'm late. You didn't like it.
But my point is that the opportunity for us to stand up with confidence right now, assure the franchisees, constituents, everybody that we're a part of, that we're not going to make the judgment calls because clearly we're not the World Health Organization. But when it comes to listening to all the information, taking it in, making the right decisions, hearing what franchisees have to say, we're going to lead and manage this organization through this and through anything else that comes our way because we're strong, we're resilient, we're a family. And that's the message, and I don't care what the crisis is, and everybody in this room is capable of doing that.
But you have to have a protocol, right? You can't just come in and somebody takes a message on a pink pad that says, you know, Pennsylvania closed, like, it's a big deal. So it's all part of that same leadership thing, sure.
And I think it's really important too, just to kind of go off of what Steve said, and just to keep remembering that it's the mindset you have, as Steve said. It's your job to stay calm. It's your job, no matter what, to see a positive somehow in this, okay? And this should not make or break you, okay? That's our hope, right? So the whole idea behind it is when you're leading, to not give up, to not let them give up. When they're asking for all those provisions, they're just automatically saying that you gotta help us. You've gotta help them help themselves first by giving them the tools, asking them the questions of what they've done to make changes. What Party said was awesome as a franchisee. They need to look at their business too. You're looking at your business, and when you are transparent that you're making changes within your organization as a franchisor, and we know what you're going through, we're doing the same thing. But these are small steps that you're taking to help them, to help the whole community. And I mean, I know that, and John can talk about this too, that in hard times, there's always that thought of PR and marketing and advertising. Do you need it? Do you want to give up? Do you want your reputation to show that you gave up, that you went dark? Do you? No. Now is the time to shine, to figure out a way to make it work, to use those creative talents to help you through this. It's going to happen again in the fall, okay? Right? I think it is. So how do you prepare for that?
It's not a marriage, it doesn't last forever.
I thought see, if you guys didn't show up, I would have been stuck in a Fishman family vacation. Can I just tell you that? And how much that would have been great. So one of the smartest things I heard yesterday was something that Dawn said, that, because we're bouncing all over the place because we're trying to touch a lot of issues, but if you haven't already in the last 48 hours tried to figure out who's going to try to put your Discovery Day, at least in part, in a virtual environment, in some way that is not a YouTube video that loses all of its draw only because of its how benign it is, but that somebody who's walking through a process has still a way to continue and move on and try to walk people who are still interested in brands. There's still a lot of really cool brands that are owned by really well-funded private equity firms and owners, and being able to do that. But I think that if your folks, how many people have a virtual Discovery Day of any kind? Who's over there? Dougie, you do? Want to tell us about it? How's it work? Sorry.
Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, virtual, we've always had virtual as an option with our brands. So this was something we were pretty well prepared for. One thing that we did do immediately is we really focused on pushing virtual and really laid off of in live D-Days. So it's really in the sales process.
Explain what happens.
So normally, when we're taking somebody through an investigation cycle, they're seeing Discovery Day at the end, right? Go to here, do Discovery Day, buy the franchise. So we have options all the time for people that struggle to get in, can't make those D-Days, whatever. So we've had virtual. Now what we're doing is we're focusing on virtual D-Day, right, from the very beginning. So we're not really introducing the normal Discovery Day. And so what we believe will happen is that just becomes the normal process. Okay, so you're looking for a silver lining right now, right, for this that's going to come up. That may be it for everyone. Think about how much money you save in time and labor and everything else when you do virtual rather than live, right? One thing, too, that I want to mention, and then I'll stop here, is when we do a virtual Discovery Day with a candidate, we get to know them way better than we do live, right? Because we're one-on-one with them for hours, and we can really get to know them and really dive into it. Where when we're in group settings with large Discovery Days, it's hard to really get to know somebody well, right? They're putting on the show just like you're putting on the show. So I think what we'll find here is as more people do virtuals, they're going to end up liking it.
But it's an interactive process. I just want to explain a little bit, because I mean, am I showing a movie, or am I talking to a person who's walking me and exposing me to assets and people on the way?
Well, you can do it in a variety of different ways. We FaceTime and do, you know, PowerPoint presentations. So it's not a lot different than it would be in Discovery Day, right? The difference is we're moving people into it and out of it online. So our staff, I mean, you're talking about saving a day in everybody's life every month as you do this. So it's really easy to implement. It doesn't really take hardly any time, and it shortens everybody's time in the whole thing. Thanks, Lane.
And it might not be.
No, I was just gonna say, I love that you said that, and that it's FaceTime and you can meet people, because the biggest pushback that we hear is that culturally, how do I know that they're a good fit for my organization if I'm doing it virtually and I don't have that one-on-one contact? So I love the way that you position it and talk about having that ability to really get to know the person, because you're right, you sit in a room with 10 people, there's always one person that takes over, right, and adjusts the conversation and changes the dynamic in the room, and you don't really ever get to know the other 9 people. And so this really allows you to be one-on-one. Again, time and money that it saves, it's so much more efficient.
Well, so you did it as a choice. I'm suggesting that sort of right now, this is more out of necessity, but I'm glad to hear that you had success at it apart from some crisis.
The best part of it, our closing ratios are even higher with virtual.
So higher closing ratios with never met the people in person. All right, so still, smart thing I heard yesterday was that, so you can be in business, so your sales team can have some ability to run people through who want to learn more about your concepts and brands through some opportunity other than continuing to break and reschedule meetings.
Who runs that? Is that your sales development person, or do you rotate other individuals in on that? I'm just curious how you do it.
It's operations.
Operations.
Operations gets it, because that's what we're selling at that time, right? So sales is overseeing it and coordinating it, but operations is delivering it.
So can I put you on the spot? Is there any elements of that you could share with your unconference community that wouldn't be like super secret stuff that you wouldn't?
I wouldn't really change what you do now. You just make it live.
Online.
Do you have anything people could look at by way of example?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk with you and kind of walk you through it. If you've never done one, then I'm sure it could be a little scary, but they're super simple. It's really easy to do. And one thing that's interesting. So we always pulled the dossiers together on candidates, right? And deliver them out to everybody in the team so that they can kind of know who's coming in. Well, they can't keep that dossier in front of them when we're in live D-days, right? It would look really bad, okay? But when you're in virtual, you can have this stuff laid out in front of you. We know their kids' names, we know what they do. We can really connect with them much better. I think you'll like it. We love it, right? So this is a catalyst for us to offer it more, and we want people to jump on it.
So do people, is everybody already way down the pike, kick the can down the pike on this one, or do you want to see examples of people doing some of this?
Hey Lane, I have a thought here. Sally back here in the corner.
Oh, my goodness.
One of the tools I know that's super easy to use and most people have access to is Google Hangouts. We do that a lot at both companies I represent, and you're seeing those people live. They can see you live. I mean, most people have on their laptop a camera, and then you can share a presentation right then and there, and you're doing both. So if you're having trouble with implementation, that would be an easy implementation tool, I thought.
Thanks, Dylan. I think that it's still a worthwhile project to collaborate among the people that will be the front runners here about the cost. There's just some stuff that is just, if you're gathering your facts, but somebody's going to need to have this slice of the pizza pie, or they're going to have, I think, a hard time figuring out what to do now. So I think that's great. Lena?
Just thinking about this, I'm not sure that would work in ours, except for we did one this week with a guy in Germany because of travel restrictions, and it made sense. But to me, there's so much that is involved in our company. We're caring for seniors, right? We've got to have people that we can believe will treat them correctly and be a good face for our company. We can't have anybody out there that we don't feel comfortable with in person. So for us, senior care industry, sizing them up, meeting them face to face is pretty critical in my mind. So back to the, maybe do a few things while this blows over. In our industry, we're still going to want them to come and meet us face to face, let us size them up. And just to correlate this, a neighbor of ours is a world champion cowboy, and when we first moved out there to this ranch, he said, don't ever buy a bad horse. Spend the money, take the time, get the right horses put to have your kids will have good experiences. They don't buck, they don't kick. If you get a bad horse, they'll just eat hay all day, and nobody will ever ride it, right? So same thing with prospects and franchising. Take the time, do whatever's necessary to make sure you have the right franchisees in place and get to know them personally. So in other industries, it may work to do virtual. In my industry, I think we're going to stick with we've got to see them face to face. We've got to be able to size them.
Maybe you need to go to them, right?
Yeah,
so you
right.
Go to them. If
We may have to modify.
You may have to go
Yeah,
to them.
for a time
That's
being.
what you need to do.
But if you're going to go full tilt on franchise sales going forward through this, then don't be surprised if how and when you validate or how franchisees describe you is part and parcel of how you handle this crisis. It's the most immediate thing. It'll be what they talk about. It won't talk about great supply chain. It won't talk about other stuff. It'll talk about this. So you need to implement a plan so you're not behind this.
So, as you can see, Sherry just ran out, and we had a phone call. We sent out messaging to our clients today. And, basically saying, we're here for you guys, and we're talking thing. Within the first 15 minutes, we got 2 phone calls. And basically asking the question is we have long-term relationships. Guys, don't pick up the phone. Don't fall in love with email and texting. And that's the thing what we're kind of going through right now is we're picking up the phone and clients are basically going, well, if we have a problem, if we call the office, it's going to go there. We're giving cell phones out. Sherry and I pretty much, to be blunt, we've canceled vacations for the next 6 weeks. Hey, it was my 30th wedding anniversary.
And I thought America would survive.
And so basically, we are pretty much going to, I told this to Sherry, I said, we're pretty much on. No, that's what I was saying. I said, but people don't forget about the phone. Pick up, talk to your franchisees. We're calling clients. We're telling them we're pretty much reachable 20 hours a day. Probably now we will be leaving our phones on at night. and in our room and with the ringer on, because this is going to be a very, very difficult time. And they don't want to hear emails. They want to hear an assuring voice that you guys really care about your franchisees, that the franchisors, the suppliers care about their clients, and the franchisees care about all their customers. People need to be assured. None of us, and I told this to my kids, in my generation, we talked about 9/11. We talked, I was talking to Teza, I go, living in Chicago, it was a horrible tragedy, but you don't see the direct effect where people are, I wasn't stocking up on water. Not that we can't find toilet paper anywhere. And, you were looking at it, this is affecting everybody in the country. It's going to end. It's going to happen probably the next 4 to 6 weeks. So if it takes a little bit longer for a franchise deal, so be it. This is not going to change the world. And they're going to find a cure for it just like they found a cure for everything. But you got to get on the phone and talk to these people. Let them know that you're with them. We're talking. We're going to have to go through, all of us are going to go through a lot of issues over the next 8, 12 weeks. I mean, we joked around about this. This is going to be the last convention, probably to June or July, if we're lucky. So we're not going to have time. Get on the phone, find out. I said this to Lynn yesterday. Maybe we should put together, something on our own site where through Franchisors.com, where people have questions, we can get answers for you.
I think we're going to try to link up this community. I was alluding to it earlier, and I'm not even sure that it's what any one person knows, but it's the collaboration. Knowing what Doug just said and knowing what Dawn's monkeying with other people is, we're happy to share that information. We're looking for vehicles and ways to do it. Do you have something?
To parlay what Brad just said, I have a friend at Oracle, and they've been dealing with the Defense Department since November. They said it's probably been in this country since then, and they're aware of this. But they feel that they'll have a cure by September. So it is going to end. And that's the important thing that we need to know. That's the message we have to do. Don't panic.
Right. Don't underestimate what panic and the disruption and watching the same news that we watch. You go through 3 things. I said to somebody yesterday on my news feed, oh, Coors has a commemorative Phillies can. How did I miss that? Right? I mean, there's no other news anybody's looking for it or cares about. And especially, I don't know what sports you like or not like, or figure skating, or maybe you could do solo in your driveway. No one's going to have anything to root for. Alice is counting eating chicken wings. But if you think about the NCAA tournament in chicken wings, is that billions of chicken wings? Very crazy. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving. One last thing.
No, I just want to say, about 10 minutes ago, we got a request to pay legal fees, but I'll let you respond back to your
It was from Jeff Wall.
First one in. First one in. I heard. First one in.
You must have not read the facts we sent you this morning. No, it's
One thing you're going to probably hear through your franchisee, you're going to hear some concerns from their partners, wives, husbands, father-in-law that invested in the business that you probably have never heard from before. So you're going to start to hear concerns from people that are part of your franchisee, but probably not the person that you've been dealing with for the last few years.
It's time to be highly visible and not hard to find and not, seemingly not dealing with it. Because I think, to Lane's point, no one's asking you to come up with a cure. If you had one, we take it, but no one's asking you for that. They're just asking you to keep them informed and point them to the right places for information. Last thing, if you're going to make deals with franchisees about anything, this, that, and the other thing, and it's going to be temporary, you've got a 10-year agreement out there that's signed by everybody, you need to call your lawyer. You need to make sure you memorialize those changes, that if you intend those changes to be temporary, they are temporary. If you intend those changes to have other ramifications or other contingent things that people are going to do, like adjust their salary or continue their marketing expenses, then you need to articulate that. I would confirm things in writing as to your own business changes, and I'd run stuff by legal if you're getting into the weeds in terms of where that is. Okay, so Suzanne, can you join me up here again? I'm going to ask Suzanne to join me and help me transition into the other topics. So first I'll ask you if anything's happened overnight, because I saw you on your phone all night last night. I figured that you must be getting more information. And then, do you want to tee up then the GR activity on?
Latest up-to-date information. I just got a draft text of the deal that was supposedly struck by the White House. and Congress. Not official sign off yet, but there is a draft floating around. It's supposed to be voted on tonight if it ends up being bipartisan. So what's in it? Expanded unemployment insurance, the temporary government-funded paid leave if you have less than 15 employees. Your employees will be able to tap that government account. The employee retention tax credit, I didn't see it in there, although it is a 108-page document. I looked at it in 5 minutes before now. But I think this is going to come later when they do employer relief. Same with this, that's not it. I did see a new paid leave provision. There's still this fight between the Democrats and Republicans in the White House about how much burden employers should bear on paid leave if you have over 15 employees. There was discussion about mandating paid leave if you have over 15 employees. Looks like that mandate is included in the bill, but only for limited instances of coronavirus. So I don't know that this deal is going to be signed off on yet. As soon as we get a summary or official word that it's signed off, it could be in the next hour. I will come back up here and let you all know. But I would say because this first bill is so focused on employees, there's some food assistance programs, et cetera, including the UI, the government program, and paid leave. This other employer type of relief will have to be a second tranche. What we're hearing right now is that the Senate will be in through next Monday, and the House Small Business Committee has a deadline for their draft of this weekend. So we do know more relief is coming. We just don't know that there was enough time to be able to get this right. So that's where we are right now. If you had asked me a week ago, and I said this yesterday, my life was all FASB. Before that, I was all joint employer. But transitioning a little bit to another cash flow issue that is not going to go in the way in the next 6 to 8 weeks. That really does you have to be mindful of it. We can't just put this aside while we're dealing with coronavirus relief. So I want to give you an update on what we're doing on that. And I guess I'll start with a thank you because everyone here at Unconference, particularly Lane and Brad, you've made sure that IFA is up to date. Really appreciate all those amazing emails you guys are sending out because without your expertise, we never would have known that this was an issue. I want to say in 2017, our members first said, hey, have you guys looked at revenue recognition rules? No, I'm a labor lobbyist. I have no idea what you're talking about. But what we quickly found out is that FASB, this independent agency, it's not even really an agency, I hate calling it that, it's an entity. They have accountants from across the world, and they came up with brand new revenue recognition standards. There's no congressional oversight, governmental oversight over this industry. And the new revenue recognition standards, just the quick and the dirty, it will require you to amortize your initial franchise fee over the life of the contract. And in 2018, we worked directly with FASB. We had some political friends on Capitol Hill pressure FASB to issue new guidance. I think Jay put a copy of that guidance on your table. November 2018, IFA called it a big win. We're like, wow, FASB, we can't believe we were able to get you to issue recognition that franchising is unique and different, and you'll be able to recognize multiple performance obligations. We thought it was amazing. We worked with Fran Data. They said that we saved 1.1 million jobs and all of this money. But what we've come to find out is last December, thank you, Lane, that the guidance was not the win that we thought it was. We now have brands that are telling us it took them 500 hours, thousands of dollars to be able to just get a portion of those initial franchise fees back, which means that they're not able to recognize as much cash as they used to. We're not going to deal with a big cash flow issue. I found one brand that spent 200 hours with their accountants trying to figure out what portion of the revenue they could recognize. They only got $1,000 per unit back. So clear to us that the 2018 guidance that you have on your table is unworkable and a huge burden for our members. So we took that story back to Capitol Hill and to FASB, and we said, we need a solution here. This is the member feedback we've gotten. If you haven't seen the links that we've been sending out via email, if you haven't filled that form out, we still encourage you to do so, because we're making the case to FASB and Capitol Hill that this is an overly burdensome regulation on the franchising industry that also is coupled with a cash flow issue. And if there is no relief, then we're not going to have the money to pay our taxes. And because FASB doesn't have any congressional oversight, there's nowhere to turn in Congress. We've actually had to meet with every committee, the House Small Business Committee, House Financial Services Committee, we met with the White House, we had discussions with the SEC. There's also this entity called Peekaboo, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, and so we talked to everybody. And you would be amazed and so frustrated if you were in DC and you heard these calls because everyone was pointing in the other direction saying, oh, that's not our job, that's the publicly traded companies. Oh, no, our oversight role is only limited to how auditors document, not necessarily accounting standards. So we got a lot of people pointing fingers in a lot of different directions, which was actually really helpful for us in Capitol Hill because I've never seen such bipartisan interest and frustration over FASB and the accounting community as right now. Because we have now evidence of auditors turning in their filing registrations incorrectly. We're working with the regulators, they're identifying those types of instances for us. I don't know how many people know Dale Cantone, I'll give you this quote, but Dale asked us to share this quote with our members in terms of making sure you're working with your auditors so that they're filing and being compliant with the 606 rules. But all of that being said, the franchise regulators don't want to have the oversight function over the auditing community. And we've been able to work directly with the regulators to take this as evidence to Congress of why they need to enact some more oversight over the accounting industry specifically. I'll go back a little bit. In terms of a cash flow problem that we've identified, if you are not able to recognize your initial franchise fee or even the majority of it, there are the franchise registration states, and if your balance sheet looks off, they may impose impound requirements, whether it's escrow or a surety bond. What we're mostly concerned about is if you escrow that money, you won't have money to pay for your taxes. We did work with FranData to assess how many of the pre-opening costs are fixed in terms of site selection, different types of training, any other fixed fees you pay that generally takes care of the initial franchise fee cost, and we came up with a number of 81%. And that's important because in terms of what we're doing to provide relief, we actually had a call with FASB this past Monday and another one this upcoming Monday because we've asked them to completely nix the 606 rules for emerging brands that have less than 500 units and just give everybody an 81% straight revenue recognition. Then you won't have to go through that huge guidance. You won't have to spend 500 hours going through any analysis. So that also resolves the franchise regulator issue where they're identifying all of the audits being filed incorrectly. So that call's on Monday. Working with FASB in the past, it typically takes them 4 to 6 weeks to get us a response. So we won't have a response in time for filing deadline, but we do understand this is going to be a recurring issue every year, so we're going to continue to press on it. And in terms of FASB itself, the chairman, Russ Golden, right now, his term is about to end, so we also have this race against time. We want to make sure that we're a priority so he gets us done before he leaves his chairmanship, and that's where we're still working with Congress. There's a lot of bipartisan interest, both sides of the aisle, both it's bicameral, both in the House and the Senate and the White House. People are extremely frustrated, and they're always looking to help out small businesses. This is a really politically safe area for them to land. So in terms of what we've been doing, the House Small Business Committee is actually the most active in this space. They've sent a letter to FASB, they've sent a letter to Peekaboo, that entity. I do think that they'll probably look at draft legislation to require some more oversight over the accounting industry, TBD, but the number one fix that we're focused on in the next couple of weeks is through the House Financial Service Committee, Capital Markets Subcommittee Chairman. His name's Brad Sherman, he's from Southern California, he's a former accountant, and we met with him with Shelley Sun 2 weeks ago, and he has been frustrated with FASB over the CECL rule, and we brought him this new small business issue, and he said outright that FASB just got it wrong. They think that initial franchise fees, just like us, for opening costs, not related to the royalty whatsoever. So he's going to write FASB a letter. FASB doesn't know it yet, but reiterating our request for the 81% initial fee. We did find that FASB has precedent for issuing new alternative accounting standards for small businesses, so we're going to press on that and use that as evidence of why they should move forward. And then in addition to that letter, we're also going to continue to meet with the SEC and the SBA. The SBA Office of Advocacy has been fantastic. They've connected us with the Chief Accountant's Office and the SEC, different personnel in the White House. So I think we're just continuing to apply pressure since there actually is no technical oversight role for Congress.
So I would like to say this for 1 second, because we blew the whistle. Actually, Joe blew the whistle to me, I blew it to Suzanne. And to say that IFA was on it in seconds now, and to have this much done was fascinating, because it actually meant that you did work on it, because you actually had been. We sit and talk about other IFA issues like AB5 and joint employer, and some stuff that people don't have quite the connection to. They don't have the connectivity as human beings, franchisors in the group. If you don't have connectivity to this, you're out of franchising. You'll find something else to do, because this is universal. This is our issue. It is an emerging issue. It is a rapidly growing issue. And I don't know, Jay, maybe you have, I can't do anything on Capitol Hill, right? We're semi-powerless as individuals without the representation of IFA. But I would like to really thank you and commend you, because we just call her and dump it on her. Gotta go, pizza's here. But she's, you took it seriously from day one, because there was a thought that IFA had gotten this great correction and everything, the world was perfect. Like, well, if it happened, no one's told everybody else that. And it was interesting, but the speed and agility with which IFA attacked this is why you want a trade association. It's why you're all here. It's hopefully why you write for FranPac when we ask you, not because you throw money around, but because you understand what it gets used for. And I'm sorry to be
No, I mean, I really appreciate it, Lane. I mean, in terms of relationships, because we've been so focused on labor issues the last several years, House Financial Services Committee is a new sort of field for us, so I can't reiterate enough, like, access to the PAC is really important. Not to say it's specifically tied to this particular effort, that would be illegal, but we do need these relationships. I know you've done excellent educational work through the UnC, not coronavirus, excuse me. But IFA's membership, you know, we're particularly worried about brands that have 0 to 25 units that have no idea this is an issue. So we are working with Jennifer in terms of trying to educate members before, you know, they face this additional economic fallout in addition to what's going on with coronavirus. So we're going to start doing a series of webinars, the first of which is going to feature Ron Herbert. He's Fast Science CFO. That's taking place Thursday, March 26th at noon, obviously free. If you want the link or you want to register, just keep in touch, shoot me an email. And I know maybe questions before Jay takes over?
Suzanne, real quick, how did the 81% arrive at as like the number that we try to achieve?
Average. I can send you the data analysis if you want to see it, because we have to justify it to FASB. And he basically, I think he called 8 different brands of all different sizes, and then he was able to figure out what the fixed building costs were, and then we just took the average. Hotels, restaurants, service, yeah, different sizes.
Let's hold it. I got a little behind, and I want to change her up, and I'd like to invite Jay to join me up here. Suzanne, can I get a round of applause for Suzanne? You fabulous work. This is not doable without them. And she's the one liked in more offices than any other offices. Like she has the Democratic side. It's great. We're lucky to have her. So we've asked Jay to try to walk us through these income recognitions. We started sort of, to Steve Greenbaum's point, we started like in the middle of the soup, talking about it as if everybody's around it knows exactly what it is, and it may be more or less complex than we're talking about. But Jay, maybe you could shed some light on it.
Sure.
All right. This is going to be really exciting, so please enjoy this. Jake, pay attention. This is important. So this is a presentation I did on WebEx and some panel discussions with IFA back in 2017 is when we started addressing this. So this is just the agenda, those are some of the people. The background of the standard, I'm going to go through this stuff fast because a lot of stuff's kind of old, but maybe it's a good education. I'd like this to be more of a discussion, so if you have questions, just put your hand up, we'll talk it through. But why is this happening? There's a convergence of standards between the International Accounting Standards Board and the FASB. They're trying to get the rules consistent around the world so that financial statements are comparable. So that's why this is happening. Franchising was intentionally scoped in, so it definitely applies to franchising. And The effective dates, pretty much for your public company, it was effective for you for 2018's filing. And for those of you who are private, it's effective basically now for your 19 filings. So I'm sure everyone's aware of that. It really is not as hard as people make it out to be. It's kind of like the fear of the unknown with the current coronavirus. It's the fear of the unknown as to how to deal with this stuff. And so it really is 5 elements to doing this. The 5 elements are up here. It's identifying the contract. Okay, so in franchising, what's the contract? It's the FTD and the franchise agreement. That's the contract. Okay, you can check that one off. That one's easy. Identify the separate performance obligations. Those are also very much spelled out in your FTD and in your agreements. So you can check that one off. You know what they are. Then this is where it gets tricky. You have to determine the transaction price, and then you have to allocate the transaction price, and then you determine what can you recognize now and what do you have to defer over time. The issue that people are facing is that the accounting firms of the world are not consistent in their application of these rules. And so some firms are saying defer it all 100% and amortize it over the period of the initial contract. Other ones are going more into detail to try to actually break out these separate performance obligations. That's what's causing the problem, is the lack of consistency, really, that's causing it. Why is it important that you do as well? Well, if you're ever going to raise debt, if you're ever going to raise capital, or if you ever think you're going to have an exit transaction, you better have it right, because the people in due diligence are going to blow up your financial statements if you didn't do it right. And you get your financial statements blown up in due diligence, guess what happens to the debt or the capital or the purchase price? It gets more expensive, or the transaction price goes down. Okay, just some education on the terminology in this. There's things that are called symbolic licenses, and then there's things that are functional licenses. Symbolic license is something that attaches itself to the intellectual property of the franchise. So what they're saying is, it's not a specific performance obligation. It's just part and parcel of being a franchisee of that system. A functional one is something very specific, like site selection. And so that's an important part of the terms. Up to this point, people have been pretty much treating these things that once the store is open or once whatever is open, that's when you recognize all the revenue. Now what they're saying is, if it's considered part of the symbolic license, it has to be deferred over the life of the contract. Any questions so far? This is fun. I love this stuff. Okay, we talked about this. You guys understand what a contract is in your business, right? Anybody have any issues in identifying what their contract is? Good, thanks. Good class. Performance obligations. Okay, what are some performance obligations you guys have? Anybody? Training. What else you got? Site selections. What else you got? I don't know, but you know where they are? They're all in your FDD, aren't they? And so when you go through and try to figure this out, if you want to know what your performance obligations are, you go straight through your FDD and it will tell you exactly what they are. This isn't hard. The first 2 steps are very, very simple.
Then maybe like software setup, technology setup, all your social media setup.
Correct. Yeah, they're very specific, aren't they? And they're very well spelled out in your FDD. So the first 2 steps, you and I could do these in about 10 minutes to figure these things out. Not very hard. The question then becomes, how do you separate these obligations? And so, if it's a specific performance obligation, you recognize the revenue on that specific performance obligations, the ones we just discussed, when you complete that specific performance obligation. If you can identify the cost and the revenue associated with site selection, when it's complete, you can recognize that revenue. That's the rule. Now, a lot of accounting firms aren't necessarily applying that rule correctly, but that's the rule. When certain types of training are complete, you can recognize the revenue and the cost associated with that training. So you just have to go through and determine what are all the revenue streams that are coming in to the business, and now you have to allocate those to the specific performance allocations. When those specific obligations are complete, you recognize that revenue. Anything left over that's a symbolic license, gets deferred over 10 years. So yeah.
I'm sorry. I also just, I wanted to mention, and maybe it's just me, I don't want to completely dismiss the contract portion of what you're trying to explain, because I know historically for a lot of franchisors, through the guidance of our legal teams, was to make our performance obligations as soft and squishy and loose as possible.
Correct.
And the franchisee obligations very concrete. So this may have us starting to rethink that agreement to really start to spell that out and be more finite with the franchisor obligations so that we can go ahead, if we end up having to go down this route and attaching that transactional.
I mean, David, that's exactly right. And some of the things we're going to talk about in a second. What can you do to make this easier on yourself? We're going to talk about that because you may want to rewrite some of these agreements to be much more specific about these topics. So.
Hey, Jay, let me just add one piece to that. The other back end of that is when you go to enforce your agreement or your non-compete, like you have to demonstrate your stuff's proprietary or that you have an interest. And if everything's generic and you actually don't
have these items tied to your brand and your intellectual property, you really don't have a protectable interest. So you have to pick your poison a little, right? You make everything generic today in the hope that you can get more revenue recognition, which may harm your ability to enforce a non-compete down the road. The decisions you make today, you may not like later.
That's exactly right. So, any other questions on this? So basically what I'm telling you is, we understand what the contract is. We understand what the specific performance obligations are. Now we have to determine what is the true economic value of it. You have to consider everything. You have to consider the upfront franchise fee, the royalty stream, all those things, and then you go in and you allocate the cost of those based on that price. Royalties aren't changing at all, so you can almost take those out of the equation. So it's how do you deal with that upfront franchise fee? And the more you can tie that upfront franchise fee to these specific performance obligations, they're discrete, the quicker you can recognize the revenue tied to that. And then what's left over is now deferred over the term of the contract. And so does that make sense? Okay. So how is allocation done? It's done on a pro rata basis, or it's done on a cost plus basis. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Work with your auditors, work with your accountants on the right way to allocate these. But first you have to figure out what is the transaction price, and then you have to come up with a rational method for allocating it. Then when those specific performance obligations are complete, you recognize the revenue and the cost associated with it.
So we added like 6 or 7 lines into our item 7 for that. So what was once included in the franchise fee or the training fee is now all broken out.
Correct.
But when you say, I can't remember the terminology you just used, a reasonable formula for the cost. As an accountant, what is something where you would say, okay, that seems reasonable without questioning? I mean, is it $500? Is it $1,000? Is it $1,500?
Yeah, you're going to have to come up with what it really a supportable way to come up with what is the value of that. How do you do that? Well, you can go out to the marketplace and say, if we did training externally, if we hired it externally, it would cost this, therefore that's a reasonable cost for that. If we were to go out and do site selection independently, that's the cost associated with that.
But that's an argument you could make. If we were to outsource this, it would cost us this much money. So even though it may not take us that many hours, or we're not spending that much, if we were to outsource it, it would cost this much, so we're charging this much.
Correct. Yeah. And all it really needs to be is rational and defensible if someone should question it. And really, all this is an exercise in documentation of how do you allocate the upfront initial franchise fee.
What about commissions?
What about commissions, Joe? What would you like to know about Joe?
Can you match that across what you have to advertise?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we're going to have a slide on that, but the question is, what do you do with broker's fees, right?
Yeah.
And what do you do with internal commission fees too, right? So those are matched up with the contract, and so broker's fees paid to external brokers or internal commissions paid on successful sales are amortized over the life of that contract. And so that's a little bit of economic relief, and then matches it together. So you're matching the string together. You're going to pay it all up front, but you're going to put it on the balance sheet and amortize it over the life of the contract. Make sense?
Jay, as opposed to engaging a third party to do say it's training, and I had Zig Ziglar does the training for my ice cream franchise, or an amazing one of our amazing real estate firms does the work for that. What happens there?
If you do it outside?
Well, you know, there's a train of thought.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, if you outsource, right?
If you pay a third party, then there's no valuation issue because it's presumably worth what you paid.
Correct.
But if you, let's say site selection and lease review, and
Right.
sometimes people run that through a third party.
Right.
To me, that seems like a logical one, especially when I paid it to a third party and there's no reason to, it's not an affiliate, it's not a profit center, it's a legitimate vendor.
Right.
Is there some shield around that gets you out of the counting the chickens in this?
Sure. If you use third parties to do any of these specific performance obligations, then it's outside of this, and it's just a period cost when it's incurred.
How many people use outside people for real estate and site selection? Or either? Right? So, I mean, most everybody, right? So that should be a cap. Nobody should be at zero because that category should exist if in fact you use it.
Correct. And if you use a third party, great, it's outside of this guidance. If you don't, and you do it internally, you can look to what would the cost be should you outsource it, and use that as the value of that when it comes to allocating the value of the initial franchise.
Then why wouldn't broker commissions be, they're a third party that you're outsourcing to, why couldn't that be a one-time? Instead of why does that be advertised over the cost?
Because that's the guidance that was written.
Well,
You don't have a choice on that one. You have to amortize it.
How is a broker commission any different than an ad in the Wall Street Journal? Right? Like we'd be able to.
Well, one's a sunk cost.
Yeah, these are very specific.
Yeah, but I look at a broker commission as a cost, as a marketing cost.
But you only incurred that when the deal was successful. You ran that ad, whether it was successful or not, and generated the lead.
Yeah.
Successful.
Right, so advertising.
You paid the commission if not for the sale. You
Right.
paid the ad regardless.
It attaches itself to the contract. So when you're paying brokers or commissions, it's tied to a successful completion. Advertising, by its definition and within the financial world, is expensed as incurred. That's just the way it is.
So, but this is in our favor, right? We're
It is in your
expensing, we're deferring expenses along with our revenues
Right.
for down the road, and that's actually in our favor.
That
because
is.
it doesn't take our P&L down.
That-
So
that's correct.
expensing commissions and things is actually good for us, which is, I think.
Exactly right. And it's one of those unique things, unicorn, where you get to keep it on the balance sheet, but also for tax purposes, it's considered a deduction when paid.
So I have to go back to, what did you say about moving training cost to item 7? What exactly did you do and how did that affect your gross?
Well, yeah, so we've already done the audit twice, and now I'm realizing they didn't defer the commissions properly.
It's all just a gamble with whoever your auditor is. But, so where we used to take, so it used to be, let's just say it's a $10,000 franchise fee, and you're like, and then training's included in that, and the site selection's included, and then we run a background check on all of our franchisees, and then we do this, like we just went out and we broke down every single dollar we spend when a franchisee comes on board, because I didn't want to deal with the argument back and forth with the auditor of trying to break that up. I wanted just to be able to point to item 7 and be like, so now our franchise fee is only $4,000 instead of $10,000, and the site selection fee is $1,500, and the background and approval fee is this, and the map drafting territory fee is this, and like we broke it up, and so you run the risk of somebody looking at it and be like, wow, these guys are really nickel and diming this. But the problem is you just don't want to have to make that argument with the auditor of breaking that up.
And I would say the way this gentleman just described it is probably one of the best ways of addressing it, is to break out those specific performance obligations, assign a cost to those that is supportable, and then you can go ahead and recognize those specific performance obligations when they are completed. Anything that's not within those specific performance obligations that is part of that fee, is considered part of the symbolic license and is then amortized.
But you're not suggesting a change to the FDD. You're just suggesting in Ryan's worksheet with his auditor, he do exactly, no, he is. That's what I'm trying to
You can do it both ways, both ways. So a good best practice would be to change the FDD to include this sort of thing on a go-forward basis. However, that being said, let's say you don't do that or you didn't do that, having that documentation in your file cabinet so that when someone asks for it, you can provide it.
I wasn't suggesting it be mismatched, it be called something artful or different. Once you have it and they break into logical fees, you describe it that way. But I was just pointing out that if you forgot to say something, I think it's still, it shouldn't matter that you put the line item next to it, because the auditor's not bound by it to begin with, because they have to make the same analysis that Jay just described.
Correct.
Hey, Jay, how would you feel about, I understand it on a worksheet, I like that idea better, but how would you feel about, how would you handle broker fees? Because that's a fairly significant.
Yeah. Broker fees have been specifically addressed, and broker fees are attached, as well as internal commissions, are attached to the contract, and they are amortized over the life of the contract. There's no discretion in that. That is the rule, and that's the way it has to be done.
But I mean, in terms of being disclosed.
Oh, in the disclosed.
Like if you were to list them in your FTD, well.
I don't think you would do that. I don't think you would have to do that. I think because it is specifically addressed in the accounting ledger, I don't think you have to address that in the FTD or anything like that. I wouldn't think. You had a question over here?
Well, I just was going to make a point that outlining those things in item 7 would probably be, in my opinion, could be used as a selling point to show that if you show like $35,000 fee or whatever, $10,000 fee, then it's often like people say, well, what am I getting for that? And if you're specifying that, then they see that. Now the other aside of that is they're going to say, well, I can get architectural done for cheaper. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's, wouldn't do that.
Yeah, sorry, I think I have a slightly different view on that as well. I'm not a fan of breaking out the fee in the FTD as to what it is unless it's absolutely necessary. You have franchisees that don't open, they want their money back. The answer is paid, fully earned, non-refundable. And we incurred, my argument back is that we incurred costs and paid commissions. Their argument back, if you line it out, is, well, you never provided the training. That was 25,000 of it. I never got this. It was 5 of it. Like everything else was a push and pull on the benefits.
But at a minimum, be able to defend how you recognize it. Whether you break it out in the FTD, which I think is a good practice for accounting purposes, maybe not for legal purposes, or at least have it in your file cabinet, so if asked, you can provide it to Jeremy Holland when he says, I want to understand your revenue recognition because Riverside's about to write you a big check. You say, here it is, Jeremy, and he's going to say, well done, we're going to pay you a premium. Is that right, Jeremy? Because you understand your business, you know what you're doing. That's important. Okay. Any questions up to this point? Step 4 is the hardest step. But I will tell you, having gone through this with Fast Signs, having gone through this with a couple other major brands, while they don't like dealing with this, what they did find out was they learned a whole lot more about their business and the way that the business operates by doing this. So there is some tangible benefit of learning the business a little bit better. But this is the hard part. And recognizing the revenue based on all the work that you've done, you recognize the revenue based on the work you've performed. Okay? That's just the basics there. Contract costs, I think we talked about that. Broker fees being the most interesting one, commissions. General impact on adoption. I think we talked about this.
Jay, can I ask one question? Because I'm still on one of like, not who cares, but why is this important? And I didn't hear something somebody said, and just pushing out the Isn't the other issue that isn't the other reason this matters is that whatever report you amortize and you have to sit on for 10 years, that's not how the tax code works, right? So you want to explain this if I don't do it wrong, but isn't it incredibly punitive in terms of how the tax code interrelates to this?
Well, let's forget about accounting and let's talk about cash flow, okay? You've received the cash, the taxes are due, you pay the taxes, okay? Because you've got constructive receipt of the cash. That's the way it works really, and it works very nicely, it's very simple. The problem becomes is if you have to escrow that money, or you have to somehow set aside that money because your financial statements are upside down. Those are the people that are most greatly impacted. And that's kind of what this slide's about. McDonald's could care less about this. They dealt with it early on. They did a great job. That's great. The people with the highest impact are the emerging brands. And that's why Suzanne and her team at the IFA are really tackling this. It's not for the McDonald's of the world. It's for the emerging brands and the smaller franchises. Make sense? They're the most impacted. What else do we have?
Actually, you know what, Jay? I thought I read somewhere that even though you have to wait for your money for 10 years, in fact, you have to recapture the other 90% in the second year, creating a much bigger liability because you were then now that again pinches on your back,
Right.
like it would if you didn't have an emergency.
So, with the exception of having to escrow the money, the cash flow is identical. The business model that you guys are doing is identical. The way you should look at your business is identical. This is simply accounting. And while you put these things on the balance sheet as opposed to recognizing them immediately, don't think of it as so much as a liability, but it's a deferral of either income or a cost. It's really not a liability in the sense you're going to be writing anybody a check. Make sense?
And just a question for some of the franchisors and registration states, some of these immersion plans, can you still get a surety bond to get your money?
Yeah, so.
I mean, this might be a suggestion for some of the folks that are trying to, you know.
No, right, so there's a handful of states, as you know, that you have to file your FDD and then it's reviewed. Within that, there's another handful that actually will review the financial statements. And if they don't like your net worth or equity, they can require financial assurance requirements. It could be an escrow, a deferral, or a bond. I think over in the tables there's a map. The red states are one that absolutely do that historically. The yellow ones don't historically, but have started asking a lot of questions about the audit this year. Like New York, they're trying to, a little education made them dangerous on this issue. Now they're all involved in the auditor's business. Every state you can provide the assurance by escrow, deferral, or bond, with the exception of Virginia, which by statute doesn't permit a bond. So you're either escrowing or deferring. As a practical matter, there are less bonding companies, in my experience, willing to do it or do it reasonably, and they almost always will require a personal guarantee if they don't like the financials of the franchisor, which that's why you're there to begin with. And it's only going to be more eroded now and more likely to get an insurance requirement, which means somebody may be looking for you to be personally on the hook on the bond as well.
So I'm going to show you a little disclosure trick that may help you with the states here in a second once we get through the basics. So I'll show you a different way of presenting your financial statements that is legitimate, but a little bit different than you've probably ever done it before. And it really allows the reader, whether it's the states or potential franchisees, to truly understand the cash situation. Well, I'll show you that in a second. Method of adoption. You can either restate completely back or you can do a cumulative catch-up. Chances are you're already there on this and probably doesn't matter that much at this point. Okay. Here are the people that are impacted by it. Investors, states, franchisees, IRS. These are all the stakeholders in your financial statements, and that's why this is important. And that's why I think Suzanne is really addressing this with the FASB. This was just, like I said, we did this back in 2017 and a couple times since. This was a timeline for adoption if you had not adopted. Fact of the matter is, it's too late for you guys to start thinking about adopting it. It's live right now. So if you haven't gotten there, well, you'll get there sooner or later. So, other considerations. Let's see. So some of the things we've talked about, other considerations here, is the breaking down of the performance obligations and the costs associated with those. So having that documentation, either whether it's in the FDD or whether it's in your drawer, and showing that is something that you need to do and be able to do to defend your position. By doing that, you accelerate the revenue recognition on everything that has a specific performance obligation, and the amount of money that actually gets deferred, it becomes minimal. You can also look to reduce your upfront franchise fee and put these costs somewhere else in your agreement. So taking it out of this equation completely. Make sense? Ad funds. So there's ad funds through the years have been treated as off balance sheet, off the income statement, completely separate. And some people put them on the balance sheet, and some people just do it straight through the income statement. So there's 100% clarity now on how ad funds are handled. Unless they are completely separate legal entities with a separate board that is not dominated by the franchisor, they are now coming on balance sheet, and they're now coming onto your P&L. So what that means is, as they are billed and collected, it is revenue. As you spend it, it is a cost. And that's the way it is. In the past, a lot of people just ran straight through the balance sheet. That is no longer an acceptable practice. So what you have, what's the impact of that? Well, unless you spend it exactly the same, you're going to have a P&L impact on that. So if you collect more and spend less, you've got more income. If you collect less and spend more, it's a negative to your P&L. It does increase your revenue, and it doesn't increase your cost structure on the P&L. Any questions around that? You can take the ad fund completely out of the equation, but to do so, you must have a completely separate board, and the franchisor cannot make the decisions on how that money is spent. I don't know too many franchisors that want to turn that over to separate boards. Questions around that? Let's see, anything else interesting? Nothing really interesting there. So that's just the basics and nuts and bolts of it. But in talking to people, I was just talking to Jeremy this morning, and the fact of the matter is the business model is still extremely sound. The cash flow, except unless you get in these escrow situations, is exactly the same. The only thing that's really, really changed is you have to go through this process, and you have to have the documentation in place for why you record that revenue. You're going to do that one time. You're doing it this year, or you did it 2 years ago. After that, you just follow it forever after that. So it's a lot of excitement about this, but it's, in my opinion, in many cases, unless you're an emerging franchisor, it's much ado about nothing, to be honest with you. Franchising is still a very solid business model. The cash flow is identical. So I'm going to show you something on board here real quick that might help you with your balance sheets. So you've got, let's see. Okay. So everyone's familiar with the sold not open, SNOs or whatever, right? Okay. So you've collected the money, but nothing has really happened yet. Nothing's open, nothing's operating. What we're recommending there is on the balance sheet, when you show the deferred revenue associated with that, you break out the deferred revenue specifically to sold not opens. So let's say, that's $100. Then you have these over here. These are actually operating units. They've been sold, they're operating. That cash flow there is much more assured. So you break this out as one component on your balance sheet, and then you have a separate one for the ones that are actually sold and operating, and that's $200, okay? Why would, any ideas why this would be meaningful to a franchisee, to a state, or an investor? Anyone? Anybody have like 300 sold but not open and 10 operating? What kind of issue does that create? It's a huge liability. And they may never open, right? And if they never open, there's no cash flow associated with that. And this becomes a real obligation. These are operating as expected, the cash flow is assured, it's just a matter of time until this is recognized. In both cases, you've got the money in the company, but these are actually operating, creating royalty streams, all that sort of thing. These are yet to open, and if you get out of balance here, you have some real issues with these SNOs or sold not open. Why would this be important? Because this is relatively assured to a state or to the state or to an investor. This creates risk here, if this gets out of whack here. So in talked with Shelley's son about it, we talked to the FASB about it, but being able to break this stuff out on your balance sheet and be able to discuss this topic is very, very useful to a user of those financial statements. Make sense? Now, Now, if you do this sort of thing, you also have to have short-term and long-term. If you have something called a classified balance sheet, we have current assets, current liabilities, long-term, and all that, you have to break it out into its components. But this allows the reader to see what's really happening with the business. Make sense?
So then would you, sorry, because we're in the era of absurd broker deals, right? Where you've got brands that are paying, brokers are selling 6-packs and 8-packs, and so there are brands with 10 operating and 100 sold.
Right.
So then would you break out those deferred expenses in the same way? So if I paid a broker, whatever, $200,000 to sell a 5-pack.
And it's on the balance sheet.
Yeah, and I've got one open, so am I gonna defer the commission for those other 4s in that same category as well?
You certainly could. There's no reason you cannot do that. There's no accounting rules that prohibit you from doing that. So I think that's a great concept. Jeff?
Think about it like this, though. Accounting's an art, not a science. And you're in control, you're the franchisor. So why don't you try to make sure whatever message you're trying to give to your potential franchisees and to the related people that see the statements, whether it's a state or whoever, what's the best picture you want to paint? So there is no accounting rule that precludes what you just said.
Right.
So if you think that's the better presentation, do so.
That's what accounting is all about, painting the best picture.
Real quick, and breaking it out this way is, I think, going to be really important, because we don't know how the examiners are going to review the financials this year. We do know that they're looking at them, and Suzanne and her team have made great headway in trying to get them to look at these things and potentially add back in the ones that are sold, to try and at least internally reconcile what the financials look like this year versus last year, and that, really nothing changed. And indications are they'll take that into consideration in determining whether or not to escrow or bond.
One other good point too.
Make the math easy.
Try to do a 3-year look back. Because for any emerging brand, if you look back 3 years and implement this 3 years ago, hopefully you see a trend that's going to get better.
Yeah.
And that'll be helpful as well.
And the whole concept here is an educated person, an educated financial person, will take this number and add it back to equity and show it, in their mind, show it there, kind of reconciles it. This would still not be considered like that. So maybe you're upside down, on your GAAP financial statements, but you can explain to California, who we talked this over with, you need to think about adding this back into equity because this is already here in this statement. And that's the whole reason for doing this. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. Any other questions or thoughts around it? So something else to consider, and I get this question a lot, is, and I think I talked this over with Riverside as well, they are looking at these things exactly the way they always looked at them. And so if you want to reconcile what it would have been under the old accounting to the new accounting, and be able to have that discussion with whomever it may be, that's a good thing to do. And those sort of schedules can be, they can be unaudited supplemental schedules to your financial statements. They can be in the FDD, and it really shows what it would have been like under the old rules. And in the footnotes of the financial statements, it's actually required that you talk about the impact from prior accounting to the current accounting. But being able to show that, once again, shows transparency to the people. And for people that are trading, the bankers and things like that, bankers are going to want to see that because they don't want to learn the accounting rules. They know what it used to be like. If you can show them nothing's really changed, it's just an accounting. Here's what it was last year. Here's what it would be under the exact same rules. Here's what it is now and how it's reconciled. They're going to breathe a little bit easier and they're going to understand your financial statements better. Okay.
So this reconciliation document that makes everything, that seems to be, that was sort of my view of what this whole thing would be about. Thanks. So what exactly is it? So I get it that it's something that's going to allow me to compare a normalized 2 years so I can compare them back to back. And it doesn't have to be in the FDD, it can't be in the FDD, right? And is it a worksheet that you would just hand out and say, with the numbers already, this is our doctored up, what it would have looked like if it was the same account? Like what do you see people do, or what do you recommend?
It's up to the individual company, but you can put it in as supplemental information as long as it's accurate.
So we can create a tool for every franchisor that has a reconciliation piece that would show them from a cash flow standpoint, net of escrows that they didn't have last year but do have this year because of their eroded financials, that life is very much the same.
And why that's important is if this accounting is really messing up your situation with your investors, your franchisees, banks, that allows them to see what it would have been on an apples-to-apples comparison to where you were in the prior years.
And I think as a franchisor, you want to own this process. You don't want the salesperson to be cutting and pasting off of some other internet-based hunk of junk that's going to try to normalize it because you heard Jay Duke say you can do anything as long as it's reasonable. I think you want to rinse that through legal so that you're doing it correctly.
Yeah, exactly right. And so I guess my final parting thoughts to you is, take the time to go through this five-step process well. Why do I recommend that? Not just winging it? Because there's going to come a day when you raise capital, debt, or you have a transaction where someone's going to want to see that and understand that. If you can show them, they will react positive to it. If you don't have backup for what you've done, there's a really good chance there's going to be complications of that, and you're going to have to go back and probably restate your financial statements as a result. That's really important.
Most brands use the same bucket, so it's not like you have to go forward to the ground.
Right.
But you think about your training fees, think about your site selection and real estate fees,
right,
and try to get some movement on that from zero. And Jay's been helping people. Joe's spent thousands of hours on the phone with people trying to coach them through at least the knowledge base of what other people got. Because franchising's an industry, and there's not all restaurants where and everything else, so you wouldn't know.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, really all you're trying to get to is a document or a memorandum that supports how you're doing your accounting. If you've accomplished that, you're done. Now just carry out the accounting from that point forward. Okay?
I mean, the fact that Dale Cantone memo that Suzanne shared was from yesterday, when he was putting out, these are people that are doing early filings, probably for April 30th, so they're trying to be like super efficient, but what he's saying is people are filing their filings with statements that don't comply with the rule change. Yesterday. Which means that, because we always say, like, is anybody listening, is this on, who's up here? But apparently there are people that are still unaware of it. They're going to, once your audit's issued, you know how easy it is to get a new issue audit issued? Impossible, once it's issued with a date on it. So this is not a thing to let go. Who's got a December 31 fiscal year in? You got till April 30th to figure it out, and if you wait till April 10th or 15th, you might not leave yourself enough time to gather all the data. But you should have categories of demonstrable expenses in those buckets of categories that Jay just went through.
Right. And, we are going to seek relief, and we're going, for certain sizes and all that, but we cannot count on that actually occurring. It's going to be a really good effort, but it may or may not occur. So you cannot count on this going away. You have to be prepared.
So the only interesting part, I was going to ask you this, the one thing that would obscure somebody's deferred revenue, ruining their financials, is like international financial crisis. Like, it's odd, and that's why we kind of had to take that material in reverse, because not only is everybody in franchising going to suffer from this, but now everybody in the universe is going to suffer from the whatever financial ramifications come from the coronavirus. And I think it's going to make this harder. It won't be standing out like a throbbing sore thumb, and I think you're going to look at Boeing's and all these giant companies that we just know that they had losses in a period of time. So this may help with the speak of taking people over the line when they're looking at information that appears worse.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So normally this discussion will go on over a couple hours, or if you do it in your offices for you specifically, it can take a couple days to get through all this. We did a condensed version here today, but on the table that Joe has provided are these slides that are related to this. And happy to discuss it with you guys independently as things further forward.
This may not be even relevant given what's happening with the coronavirus, but how do you think this will affect the FTD reviews in those states? I mean, is this going to delay things? Are they prepared for this conversation? Have they gone through and looked at what revenue recognition is? Are they going to have a sense of what our financials are going to be adjusted for this, or are they oblivious to this?
No, they're not oblivious. The IFA has a task force that has met with many of the state examiners. They've been communicating it with them, so it doesn't come as a surprise that everybody's financials just cratered this year. Their view, though, is like, look, our statutes say it's gap and gas, and they're going to look at it that way. We have had some success, as I said, with Suzanne and her team, getting with California in particular, where it's like, if you build it out this way, we have arguments to add it back in, and an argument to say it's really not different than it was in prior years, so an insurance requirement isn't appropriate here. I suspect we'll still see more of them than we otherwise would. I think the last couple of years, we've been seeing more of them generally. They've really tightened in how they review the financials. But to your other point, yeah, I think it's absolutely going to delay it because it's one more thing they're now paying attention to. It's new to them as well to us, and I think you're going to see disparate treatment even, not just between states, but within offices. We see it already in my team and stuff, and I think we're going to see it here where you have some examiners that, different facts, but be more susceptible to the argument, and others that'll be more like, look, it says cap and gas, and this is your equity, and like, sorry. And I think certain states will be really hard on it, like, Washington. They have a statute that says you need 100 grand net worth. If cap and gas says you don't have it, you don't have it. So I can almost guarantee you everybody's getting impounded in Washington, regardless of how it's presented, if you don't have 100 grand. There's also other issues in Washington now too, but I'll defer to them. Stephanie, at the Electric Republic, you've just been through the process. I think you got 60% recognized up front. Can you talk about how that push and pull with your accountant was and what your experience was?
Yeah, our accountant, basically, it's the same thing what you all are talking about with site selection, training, background, all of that, that we ended up calculating the hours of our staff that were put into that process and came to a dollar amount that ended up being that 60%, and then the 40% that we're going to amortize over the life of the contract. The support issue is probably what's been probably the most frustrating part because of how much time that has taken us to provide the support and the ongoing support that will have to take place. So, hundreds of hours that have gone into that. I really liked all of this, and with the matching expenses, I actually was really relieved that we had done it correctly with the commissions. And even that piece that's in there is then keeping track of all of that and making sure that getting put. I really liked the sold not open and breaking that down because I think that will give potential investors and the states a way to look at it and get back to that number. So.
No, that's great. And then Jeff, I think you're, at least I think the hero in the room, getting 80-some% when Suzanne's trying to undo you down a couple points, I think. So how did that experience work with you?
We got 83%. So our audit just got finalized Tuesday. We're sending our FTD out today. So sitting in Jay's session 2 or 3 years ago and Joe's session, I went, uh-oh, because we're an emerging franchise. We're under 100 units. And so here's been my experience with this. Jay, you mentioned earlier, this doesn't affect the big boys. This went into effect for the big boys last year. They all did it. My guess is that there was very quiet, because in a lot of ways this may have helped somebody if you sold more units a number of years ago than less units because you're out of territory. So this actually probably had a financial impact on the positive for them. This is now hitting the emerging franchisors. So I use not you guys, I use a large accounting firm in Chicago that is not franchisor specific. I found in working with them, I've been working with them for 2 years, that I've been annoyed that they have not recognized 100% of the revenue. Because I've stated I started changing our FTD 2 or 3 years ago on the performance obligations, and have been making the case for years now that we should be 100%. So Suzanne, you've been an awesome help on everything, but I still think we go back and go 100%, not 81. My experience has been that in the past, when your auditors would give you your financial statements, you would go, okay, thank you. 2 + 2 = 4, I get it. My experience has been that this has been more of a negotiation and an education. I have pushed back strongly to the auditors over the last 2 years on this to try to, again, establish why I think we should be at 100%. And then they come back with all this stuff, and I say, I've learned this over the last few years. Just because
somebody says something, or the facts may be one thing, you can interpret them differently according to the media and certain politicians. So, I have pushed back and said, I don't believe that you are interpreting the FASB ruling in the way you are. We have effectively been able to push back. As you have said, we have gone out there in our is that item 7 or 11 where you list out the hours and the training. We have effectively been able to push that through. And I would say again, the biggest thing I've learned is this has been a negotiation with my auditors.
A negotiation and an education, because guess what? A lot of firms don't really put the time
and the energy into understanding this. So sometimes you got to educate them and pull them kicking and screaming. But you can point to these things and show them how to do this. You can get there. It's going to take a little effort on your part to get there. So.
Jeff, to agree with what you say, sometimes the franchisor has to look for firms that aren't familiar with the industry. And that's what you're basically saying. Because there's a lot of owners out there that do not know the industry well, or the income recognition rules.
Yeah, and the safe play, like what a lot of times the big four will do with the McDonald's of the world is like, we're not going to put the energy in this, we're not going to learn it, we're just going to defer it 100%, because guess what, the impact's nothing. But for this gentleman, it would be a big deal if they did it that way.
If I'm going to go, and like again, I don't know, but what's the range of percentages you're seeing out there for franchisors?
I mean, legitimately, some people are putting in 0 and deferring 100% because they don't want to deal with it. But for the people that actually go through the exercise, you're seeing 40 to now in the 80s.
Okay, so let's just go with an average of 60. If I'm going to go to Jay's firm and go, I want to argue for 80, and he's saying an average of 60, that's going to be really hard, right? Especially if you're looking over and you go, look, we've got 100 franchisors at 60. Who the hell do you think you are trying to push for 80? So I go, that's a challenge, because I go, you have a ton of experience working with franchisors. We've been fortunate that we were ahead of it, and one of a few franchisors with our accounting firm that have probably been able to push it a little further, maybe because of their lack of education.
Well, if you can document it well, I mean, the owner's job is to check your documentation.
I'm guessing we're not at 100%.
And what you're saying is true, because it really isn't a one-size-fits-all. Depending on the way you operate your business, 40% may be right, or 100% may be right. And you have to approach it with your auditors that this is unique to your business. Here are the rules, they're universal. Let me show you how this applies to my company. And if you can document that, they will accept it. But if you go in with a blank sheet of paper, they're gonna auditors by nature are very conservative. They're gonna say defer.
Amy, if you don't mind, how do you make out? 100%? Or is it in the can, or did you try and put up a fight, or you just roll with it?
And that's the way it is. That's acceptable to you. That's correct.
We still have time though, right?
A couple weeks. That's not much. So, yeah. All right. So that's the basics. Once again, if you guys ever have any questions, my information is all in the app, or I'm happy to talk to you guys. I love doing this stuff. This isn't really my day job. This is what I do for fun, believe it or not. But anyway, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. And like I said, I'm happy to have a discussion in the hallway anytime.
I just met seemingly 1,000 hours a day in countries, and I've never seen you actually do the instructor, Jay. It was amazing, and actually, my wife would call it a good explainer. No, it's, I asked Jay to come do it. People were, pushing Joe and I back for years on why is this important, why are you giving me such great damage on it. Hopefully by now it is apparent, people who are getting their clocks cleaned in Maryland are learning the hard way. It's how important it is. I hope you appreciate that we go to a lot of effort to try to assemble data over a lot of different industries and a lot of different franchisors, so that you can have a context to know that how great you did, Jeff, or how better you could do, or how you did do it. Without that context, you're just totally shooting in the dark. And so we'll continue to pepper you with those kinds of information, put that stuff on our Franchisors.com site. We're trying to identify what information is useful to emerging franchisors and franchisors generally, and we're trying to house that on our Franchisors.com community site, because that's the community information, and we're sharing it without most even reference to who wrote it in our team. It's usually Joe. and my name is associated more closely to it. But truthfully, really, if I'm giving people credit, Joe is the one that reads the stuff carefully and is the one that comes in and thinks about it overnight and will say, will have broad-reaching implications for us. It's like, Joe, but sorry, let's get Joe.
I send your feed on this to our auditors. I get your email, I send it to our auditors.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Apparently, right?
You have no idea how much that whole process hurt my feelings.
So do you know what happened? Joe wrote like a thesis on it that you would present at Harvard. With every word was 9 syllables, and I dictated something on my iPhone that came out a little garbled, and then associated with rap lyrics, 9,000 views and likes. Joe's over there in disbelief, but it's all Joe's content. It's just, I'm always trying to filter it for a different audience, what I do, but trust me, that's where the smart kid sits. And even with NASDAQ and all this other stuff that we have access to and knowledge about, it makes us a stronger, better team, and we share that with you. Any announcements, Mike?
You want to do it, or?
Sure, if you're going to, yeah, you want
Dinner tonight. I know some people are leaving today. Well, I don't need this. I'm loud enough. Dinner is downstairs at Myrtle Rose at 7:30.
Yes.
It's very difficult to find right next to Maxwell's. So we won't have to go for pizza afterwards because we'll be serving pizza there tonight. Right?
Yeah, and if you're going to High West, the bus will be outside at 11, and they want to leave by 11:15.
All right, can I ask our team to join me up here? Come on up. I always yell thanks and applause to the far corner, but doesn't nearly do justice to the effort and the kind of love and intensity you put into this event and this group.
No hugging.
No hugging at all, but honestly, these 3 people care about you and this event and what your every movement is, what you eat, where you walk, how long you walk, in what weather you walk in, whether you need an umbrella. There's nobody who cares more about what people do in an event. And I don't know how we got it or got lucky enough to have it. It's certainly the DNA that we've been trying to inject into this event from the beginning, but we could never, ever, in a million years, do it without Antonia and Amelia.
Most people know it's not the most easiest thing to deal with Lane, let alone me.
I was going to say him.
Well, he's way worse than me.
Unfortunately for you guys, Brad will be around. No, so thanks everybody. Thanks for coming. We hope you see it tonight. It may be, somebody has mentioned that there may be a shortage of Ubers to get out of here, and if that is so, can we just verify that? If it is so, can you do a blast and ask people who are looking to get down the mountain at a certain time or headed to the airport to share if they have space and exit? We'll try to match up folks that have vehicles with folks who need a lift, if that becomes a problem. I don't know, but I heard it, so. All right? All right. Everybody else, last thing? Last word? Thanks for all the supplies. Thanks for putting this stuff in the bag. Thanks for people who put it in the bag.